Okay, great. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Municipal Audit Committee to order. We are noticed today from 3:10 p.m. to 4:10 p.m. Let's go ahead and do a roll call, please.
Yes, Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Ms. Allard. Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Ms. Demboski.
Present.
Mr. Frisk.
Sorry about that. Didn't realize I was on mute.
Hello, Mr. Frisk, and Ms. Morrison.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Great, thank you. All right, so we have a couple of items on our agenda today. First, we have the review of the 2022 audit plan. Just as a reminder, after we're done with our review of the plan, we will need to make, per code, a motion to recommend approval of the plan to the full assembly. So I'm glad we have quorum now so we can make that motion and take that vote. And then second, we're going to be discussing Internal Audit Report 2021-08, monitoring of overtime. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the review of the 2022 audit plan. I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chadwick.
Thank you, Chair Rivera. Desiree, could you please bring up the draft audit plan?
Sure thing, one sec.
Thank you. While she's bringing that up, I'd just like to let you know that prior to the end of the year, we plan on releasing 2 additional audit reports. One is a levy upon connection audit report dealing with AWU, and the other report is our 3-year review. Every 3 years, we do a review of the Police and Fire Retiree Medical Trust Fund. And so that will be released prior to the end of the year. They're currently in the final review process. Also, we have some audits that are in production this year that will be releasing sometime next year. Right now, we're working on, as shown on the audit plan, 2021 audits continue to 2022. We have an audit of sole source procurement that we're currently working on, an audit dealing with vendor discounts that we just started, and an audit that we are nearing completion regarding performance measures. In 2022, we have 15 audits plus an annual P-card audit that we have put onto our suggested audit plan. For fire, we have contracted billing and collection services and training center operations. For the health department, we have the Chugach Eagle River Senior Center contract compliance. We then have cash controls and invoice processing at APD. At AWU, coins can count, and uniform and entryway mat rental contract. Then we have at the Economic and Community Development, ACVB contract compliance. In finance, we have accounts receivable follow-up and contract collections. And then at the library, we have a follow-up audit regarding a finding we had regarding assistance provided to the Friends of the Library and the Anchorage Library Foundation. Parks and Rec, we have pool cash controls. Planning, we have referred items to Chugach Eagle River Advisory Board. And at purchasing department operations, and at risk management insured properties. Then we have the sunset audits. We have 6 of those this year. One audit that we had done 3 years ago that we're not doing this year because it was put on a 5-year sunset review cycle is the bidding review board. We would have done it this year, but it's now done every 5 years. And then we have some special studies. The routine special studies or routine audits, such as the P-card audit and the P-card rebate. And then this is some special studies, change orders and amendments to purchase orders, building inspections, time study, how long does it take to do an inspection, and then port petroleum reporting. And that's our proposed 2022 audit plan. I'm open to any questions that you may have or discussions.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chadwick.
Yes.
Is there any discussion? Otherwise, I will go ahead and get started, or get us started.
Chair Rivera, this is Travis Frisk. Can I ask a real quick question of Mike?
Go ahead.
I apologize, Mike. Did you say that, and I was trying to follow on the sheet that Desiree was scrolling. Did you say you're going to do an AP and an AR review of finance? Did I hear that correctly?
Well, right now we're doing vendor contract, or not vendor contract, vendor discounts at finance.
Yes.
I guess you could say that's AP, and we're doing that right now. And then we have suggested doing a accounts receivable follow-up audit for next year. We did one probably about, I don't know, it was about 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay, thank you. I just want, thanks for the clarification. I just wanted to make sure, because I thought that's what we were doing, and I wasn't sure if I heard it correctly. So thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay, all right, not seeing anyone else in the queue. I'll go ahead and go through some of my questions. So first is regarding the 2021 audits that are being continued performance measures. Is that PVRs? Is that what that is, Mr. Chadwick?
Yes, you are correct. That is PVRs, performance measures.
And can you remind me what the goal of that audit is?
The performance measure audit, if you hold on 1 second, I can look at that. That was basically to look at how well, if the measures that are being reported are accurate in terms of can they back those up with data, and also are people using these performance measures and how they're being used.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that'd be helpful, because I know in particular Ms. Kennedy has an interest in that, and I think a couple other members as well, of the utility of those measures, both for the assembly, the administration, as well as the public. Can you remind me, next question I have on the follow-up audit for the library, can you remind me what the initial finding was that is triggering this follow-up audit?
The initial finding was we did that audit several years ago. I believe it was in 2018, I think we did the audit. And at that time, we found that the library was providing quite a bit of assistance to Friends of the Library and the Anchorage Library Foundation, but that assistance wasn't formalized in any type of agreement. And at that time, we suggested that they enter into a formal agreement if that was assistance that they wish to continue to provide.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Not seeing anyone else in the queue, I'm just going to keep going through my questions. So next I have on the 2022 routine audits, on the grant compliance audits. Are those going to be randomly selected, or are you going to have the ability to perhaps have, let's say, look at ARPA funds or CARES Act funds to look at grant compliance?
Mr. Rivera, usually these selected grant compliance audits, these are usually done on an as-needed basis. So there's no particular audit that we are thinking of at this time. But as throughout the years, issues may come up and we may be asked to look at something. So there's no particular audit that we have right now in mind. They're more on an as-needed basis.
Got it. And just to be clear on the record, I don't think there are any issues, at least none that I've heard of, with regard to the grants. But I know that there are members who are just interested in closing that loop on the folks that the Assembly and the administration did award grants to, and just getting a sense of did the money get spent the way that we thought it would get spent? And I know that BDO did a little bit of work, but I think this is probably a different degree of that kind of work. Okay, so then last, as we have discussed in years past, Mr. Chadwick, staffing is a precious resource. So can you just give me a sense of sort of looking at this audit? Is this something that the staff at Internal Audit are able to accomplish?
Mr. Rivera, that's a good question. We have 15 audits that are scheduled for 2022, in addition to the 6 sunset audits. Anything else that may come up, because we do get other requests for special studies. For example, none of the labor agreements that we price out are on here. And those just come up on an as-needed basis. This year, I believe we'll have about 18 or 19 special studies that we've done, dealing from everything from labor agreements to the port asked us to do a few things. So there's all sorts of things that come up. Looking at just the core of those 15 audits, we will get to a lot of these, but some of them may fall out for a variety of reasons. There may be a change in management. The program may go away. The pool cash controls, we haven't done that one. It was on the audit plan for last year. We didn't do that because the pools just weren't fully opened. Now, my understanding is that the pools are beginning to reopen with more hours, and so that's something that we may get to. So some of these audits may fall out. So we probably will not get to some of these audits. We certainly we would like to be able to get to them, but it's nice to have a few extra audits on here just in case something doesn't work out for whatever reason it may be. So given our staffing, our current staffing levels, we'll certainly get to the sunset audits because those are by code. We'll certainly do the P-card audit because that's required. But these other audits, the other 15 audits, we'll probably get to about 9 or 10 of them. A couple may fall out, and a couple we may have to push to next year. In addition, every year we've done a travel study, a special study where we basically summarize travel. We didn't audit travel per se, but we just summarize it into categories of how much was spent for air travel, how much was spent for hotels, how much was spent for food, those types of things. And we've provided that every year. And our audit technician is the person who performed that function and did all that work every year. But because of the budget reductions that we had this year, the 5% reduction, our audit technician, she retired at the beginning of September, and that position will be left vacant until the 4th quarter of next year in order to meet the required budget reduction. So we will not be, I'm proposing that we not do the travel study this year. It does take quite a bit of time, and it was something that was nice for the audit technician to do. The audit technician position, just so you're aware, that's a part-time position with our office. The audit technician is 20 hours per week, and we're just going to leave that vacant up until the 4th quarter. And because we don't have that resource, I don't think we'll be able to do that travel study unless there's just an overwhelming need that someone asks us to do that. We're proposing not to do that this year. Did I answer your question?
You did, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chadwick. It sounds like your cup overfloweth. But it's a small and mighty team. I appreciate all the work that Internal Audit does. Okay, I will go ahead and go next to Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A very mighty team indeed. Mr. Chadwick, I've got a question for you. Could you remind me of the schedule for some of the legislative branch audits with the clerk's office and ombudsman, and if we have the Assembly Council audit on that rotation too?
Oh, I mean, periodically looking at the clerk's office, you mean?
Yes, and I'm trying to remember if it's a regular recurring audit, or it's just one that has been periodically scheduled and, same for not just the clerk's office, but like the ombudsman and assembly council?
The clerk and the ombudsman has been periodically scheduled. There's been really no fixed schedule to that. And we did a special study of the clerk's office last year, I believe it was. And we did a quick special review of some of the election process several years ago when the mail-in ballots got going. But those are not on a recurring fixed schedule. It's something we can certainly add to the audit program or audit plan.
Thanks. Appreciate that. And I think we do need to add probably the ombudsman's office and then assembly council in there as well. And I know you have, as you have explained, a very full schedule for this year. Has there been an audit done of the assembly council's office before? I think there's been one done of the ombudsman, correct?
Correct. We have done one of the ombudsman, but we have never done one of the assembly council.
So I think, Mr. Chair and Mr. Chadwick, I might suggest that we consider adding an audit of assembly council for this year and then figure out maybe some kind of recurring scheduling for clerk's office, ombudsman audits, just so we have that regular review. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I think what I'm going to do, Ms. LaFrance, is once we actually have a motion on the floor to approve, I will turn to you to make an amendment, and then we can vote on an amendment to add those special studies.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, any other discussion before we make that motion? All right, not seeing any, then I think now would be appropriate time to make a motion to recommend approval of the 2022 audit plan to the full assembly.
I move to recommend approval of the 2022 audit plan to the full assembly.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All right, so now we have that motion before us. Oh. Okay, so now that we have that motion before us, I'll go ahead and turn to you, Ms. LaFrance, for your amendment.
I move to amend the 2022 audit plan to include a special study on the assembly council office.
I'll second for you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. LaFrance.
I know we already spoke to this a little bit, and I wasn't sure on the wording. I know we had talked or mentioned it as a special study and also as an audit, and that it fits in within those other special studies that have been done for the clerk's office, elections, ombudsman. So I recognize that the amendment language may need tweaking.
Thank you. Mr. Chadwick, is that is the intent enough for you to know where to place this audit?
Mr. Rivera, from what I've heard, I think this would probably be suited best as a special study.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, is there any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, not seeing any. Then I'm going to just go ahead and try for unanimous consent. Is there any opposition to approval of this amendment? Okay, not seeing any, then that amendment is approved. Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Any other discussion before we take a vote? All right, not seeing anyone. Ms. Camacho, if you can go ahead and do the roll call vote, please.
Yes. Mr. Rivera.
Yes.
Ms. Allard is absent. Ms. LaFrance.
Yes.
Ms. Dombrowski.
Yes.
Mr. Frisk.
Yes.
And Ms. Morrison.
Yes.
You have 5 yeses.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, and thank you, Mr. Chadwick and your team for all of your work on the audit plan. Looking forward to reviewing the audits next year.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to our next item on our agenda, Internal Audit Report 2021-08, Monitoring of Overtime. And I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chadwick.
Thank you. This was an audit that we recently completed. There were 5 findings in connection with this audit, and management was responsive to all the findings and recommendations. Finding 1, we found that overtime was not always effectively monitored. Some departments we reviewed did not use overtime reports to monitor or control overtime expenses, but only tracked overtime as part of their.
And actually, sorry, Mr. Chadwick, if I can interrupt you really quick.
Go ahead.
My apologies. So I don't see any members of the public with us now, but for any of the members of the public listening to the recording, you can find documents, both the draft audit plan that we just recommended to the full assembly for approval, as well as internal audit report, 2021-08. You can find those on the committee's website. If you just go to muni.org, click on the assembly button on the homepage, then go to committees, Municipal Audit Committee, you will find these documents there. Thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. I might add too that all of our audit reports are on Internal Audit's website, listed both by year and by department. So, finding 1, we just found that overtime was not always effectively monitored. For the most part, we found that departments tracked overtime as part of their general financial reports, but didn't have any other type of monitoring mechanism to show what the overtime was about. Finding 2, on page 5, we found that existing overtime tracking and approval functionality with SAP was not used. Specifically, SAP has an overtime request form, but we didn't find it was used. In fact, in most cases, we found that departments weren't even aware of it. And finding 3 on page 6, we found that municipal departments we reviewed could not provide complete documentation of all the overtime that was incurred. And on finding 4, page 7, we found that some departments did not always require advance approval of overtime. And then finally, on page 5, or on page 9, finding 5, the overtime PMP 40-9 was outdated. It hadn't been updated since January 6, 1997. And that is our overtime report. In the back of the overtime report, the monitoring overtime report, we show the top overtime earners, the top 20 overtime earners in 2020. And then we provide some additional statistics regarding individual overtime earnings in 2020. And that's our report. I'm opened up to any questions you may have or clarifications.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chadwick. So I put myself in the queue. Any other members, feel free to put yourself in the queue. So first is, and some of these questions might go to the administration, some of them might go to you, Mr. Chadwick, or your team. So first, do we know if using SAP actually makes it easier to keep track of and monitor overtime?
Mr. Rivera, SAP has within it the functionality to track overtime in terms of that SAP overtime request form. However, that request form is, you can put in a reason for overtime, but everybody can put in whatever reason they want. So if you were to use that to say, well, why do we have overtime? It would be difficult because there would be so many different reasons it'd be hard to categorize them. Instead of having, say, a drop-down menu that gives, 30 different options for overtime, you go, oh, okay, now I can sort and query on the 30 different options. So while the overtime request form is helpful, it doesn't necessarily provide the data that you would need to say, why is overtime occurring?
Got it. Yeah, that was the crux of my question. So if SAP, at least the way it's configured now, doesn't necessarily do the job that we're hoping it does, is there a way to customize? I know we're heading into treacherous waters, but is there a way to customize SAP to allow us to do that? And is there utility in doing that?
I suspect there is a way to customize it, and that's why we recommended that the municipal manager consider forming a working group to determine what data would be useful and how that data can best be captured and analyzed. Right now, APD, while they don't use the SAP part of this to track why they have overtime, there's Telestaff does a wonderful job in tracking the reasons for their overtime. So we thought best, because of the complexity of this, that a working group be formed to help determine what is best to capture and what's the best way to capture that overtime.
Got it. Thank you. And that's actually a perfect segue to two other questions that I have. And I think both of these will probably be best answered by the administration. So first is, I did see that the working group was mentioned several times throughout the audit. Has the administration given further thought to that? And is that something that the administration thinks would be helpful in achieving your goals? And then I guess what is the goal here? Is the goal to reduce overtime or to simply better monitor our overtime and ensure compliance with our personnel rules and municipal code?
That's a great question. This is Amy Dabowski for the administration. First, I will say, yes, we've given a lot of thought to the work group. In fact, you may have noticed, I'm guessing with discussions with the fire department, you have noticed, I am very interested in overtime management. Specifically, the goal is to make sure the departments are coming in on budget or under budget relating to staffing. There's always going to be times where there's, special circumstances. If you have a major wildland fire, if you have a major, event, earthquake, whatnot, then we may see extra overtime being needed in the winter. Frankly, you might see it in street maintenance if they have a lot of snow one winter versus another. So those are things that we try to plan for as best as we can, but we don't plan for the exceptional. We plan for the routine and have a buffer for the exceptional to some degree. But yes, and Felix, to your point, as far as the working group, yeah, I do anticipate setting one up. But just for your information, my routine meetings with department directors, they have a series of questions that I always ask them, and they generally come prepared. And I'm always asking them, what is your overtime budget and what is your spend on your overtime budget? So every single month, they have to go over those numbers with me. So we are closely looking at that. But I really do believe in right-sized budgeting, which means part of that is to understand why the overtime is happening. That way, when we go to the assembly and we say, this is how much it's going to cost to run this department for this year, we're giving you a true and accurate number. So that is my goal, and I think we will get there. But now this was a great starting point, and I really appreciate all the work of internal audit, because this is kind of a good discussion starting point for us, and they've given us some good ideas of maybe how we can collaborate a little bit better internally in order to understand the data points that we can maybe tease out to help us better budget.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that. I guess I have a follow-up question on that. So, you know, I know some members, in particular the Public Safety Committee co-chairs, Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Perez-Verdia, they have talked about both APD and AFD's overtime. They've talked about it from a policy perspective. And so I'm wondering, if at some point, do you think that any product from the work group or any of the work that you're doing with those department heads, at some point, those will become sort of policy decisions that eventually come to the committee or to the full assembly for consideration? Like, is that in the realm of what you're thinking?
I think the best way for me to answer that is, I think the answer is yes, but the policy will be through the budget most likely. And the reason I say that is, as you think back over probably your last few years over the assembly, you could probably think year after year after year, APD comes forward and says, we've overspent our overtime budget by, $2 million, $3 million. And I think it goes back to what I originally said about right-size budgeting. I think we have to realistically look at what is the average, use of overtime, why does it happen, and we should just be budgeting it accordingly rather than every year going back saying, hey, we overspent our budget. We should actually understand the individual mechanisms, but if it happens every single year, my recommendation is let's be realistic in our budgeting and budget for what we actually expect rather than saying we just blew our budget by $2 million. So I guess that's a long way of saying I think you're going to see the policy decisions most likely through the budget.
Got it. Thank you. All right, those were, I think, all the questions that I had. Is there any other discussion on the audit report?
Mr. Rivera, this is Travis.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. I was looking at the top 20 overtime earners in 2020, and I noticed that about 6 or 7 of those are ML&P employees that are probably going to roll off of this report going forward. And just quick numbers, it's almost $400,000. So we should see a decrease in overtime off of that specific entity going away as well. So just a caveat to that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank Mr. Chadwick and his team for this report. And I wanted to comment on Ms. Ditmosky's comment about overtime and budgeting accordingly. And just that I completely support and agree with that approach. And that every year when those overages hit, it's not a surprise anymore. And so I just wanted to express full support for making sure that we address that on the budget and early on. So thanks for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right. Not seeing any further discussion. Thank you again, Mr. Chadwick, for your work on this audit report.
Thank you. And can I just ask one question going back to the audit plan?
Sure.
My intention, unless something else says differently, would be to present this audit plan then at the January 11th assembly meeting. Is that acceptable?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I think our December 21st meeting might be busy.
Okay, that's what I will plan to do then. Thank you.
Great. All right, so then going back to the agenda, so that includes our 2 main items of business. Under C, other business, we don't have anything under that. And moving on, under 4, unfinished business, we don't have anything there. So we'll go ahead and move on to audience participation. Are there any members of the public who'd like to participate? I'm not seeing any members of the public on the call. Okay, not seeing and hearing anyone. then I think we are ready to adjourn. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Great. All right. We thanks. All right. We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.